T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Launch Sequence Podcast. We're back for another week with more space stuff with your space tomato and space things. And this guy, he also likes space stuff. And we've got a lot of engineering to talk about today. I'm just going to jump right into that because it's been a while. We've been waiting a long time for engineering gameplay in Star Citizen. Some believe it's going to kill your solo ship. Some people believe it's going to kill Star Citizen entirely. Some people believe it's the best thing since engineered bread. It's kind of, the reception's all across the board, but for now we're seeing it in a very early stage. So I brought on Farrister, who has been giddy about engineering for like years, and we've been talking about this for years, and we knew that as soon as we got hands on, we were going to get together and chat about how it's going. So finally, with it in very early testing and nowhere near ready for live, first impressions. But before we get to that, I do want to talk about IAE, which is the hot news, the big thing going on, new ships coming out, and what's going on this week. So thank you for joining me, Farrister. How are you doing today?
Pleasure to be here as always. And I think for as long as I think we've known each other, I think we've both known that engineering was on the agenda for both of us. So I think we've been waiting to have this conversation for a while. So it feels great that we've got an actual PTU test rather than just the Arena Commander stuff to get into. And yes, IE just on the horizon as well. There's a lot happening in November.
Yeah, November's a busy month, man. I mean, we have American Thanksgiving over here, and then IAE is in the same week. So I don't know about everybody else, but I'm in the middle of trying to travel for Thanksgiving, go see family, while also trying to cover Star Citizen or even pay attention to Star Citizen during like one of its biggest weeks of the year. It's crazy, but it's exciting. I'm excited for it. You usually a big fan of IAE? Is it something you like to tune into?
I am usually a big fan of IE, and I think we'll get into it. But for me, it's a really good opportunity to get back to ships and flying different ships that I've perhaps not flown for a while, or perhaps it's new. So I really like it for just changing up the day-to-day of what I do in game.
Yeah, I think, man, I couldn't tell you what the first YouTube video I saw from you was, but I'm pretty sure for a long time I was watching your YouTube channel because of ship videos. And I think you do a very good job with the ship review. So happy to hear if you're going to get more hands-on with more ships. Any particular ones that you've just been like itching?
Well, I think the ones that I'm really itching for aren't quite here yet, but might be here for IAE.
We love new stuff. We do.
We love new stuff. I mean, what I would say is I think the past couple of years, I reflected back on IE's gone by, and actually, I have to say, there's a lot of criticism that lands with the Star Citizen team for stuff that we're promised that we don't yet have. And one of those, of course, is the meme that Star Citizen spaceships are just fancy JPEGs because they're all still in concept.
Yeah.
But actually, they've really moved the dial on that. I think there are a lot of ships that people have been waiting for that are starting to get delivered. And I really like the cadence of, hey, we're introducing a new ship, but we're pretty much introducing it to flyable. So I think when you just compare where we're at for this IAE versus last IAE, we've got a lot more ships that are in players' hands, including things that are at the smallest end of the scale, some exciting new fighters and things like that. And also the larger end of the scale, I think the Polaris was only December last year, and then we got the Idris to hangars again this year. So I think there's a lot of movement, and I'm excited to see what we might get this year. We'll see.
It wasn't only a couple years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when there was a lot of hubbub about the idea of how many concept ships still needed to be delivered and how long that might take. And a little panic set in for folks about the backlog and what it might mean in terms of when they might get their ship. Do you think people are feeling better about that now than before? Or have they shifted the worry from concepts to straight to flyable?
It probably depends on which ship it is. If you were a Banu merchantman owner, you're probably not feeling that much better about it. But I think in all seriousness, the more they can do to move ships through that pipeline and get them in player hands, I think is good. Uh, a lot of people, I think, buy ships for what they think they might be. As we've often seen, sometimes that holds true and sometimes it doesn't. So I think it will at least give some element of this is what I paid for, this is what I bought, and this is what I want, or actually, this wasn't really what I wanted. And I like the idea of not just introducing concept ships to keep the bank balance rolling. I think actually bringing things in that are in game straight away signals a kind of change in the project of rather than we're just going to keep this hamster wheel turning. It's actually more focused on delivery for players, and I think subtly that's quite a good message.
Yeah, I would say they've done a lot of things this year to show that they care more about their public image. And it all started back in, I want to say it was February, maybe January, but I'm pretty sure it was February when they actually just straight up canceled a free flight event. And I think that was the first real tell to a lot of folks that like, oh, they want to be taken a little more seriously. And then they've done some other things throughout the year, like pledging that they wouldn't do any more concept ships. And now obviously we do get to IAE, and where there used to be concept ships, it's looking like we're just gonna get a whole bunch of spaceships straight into the game with this event. Is it, what is it, like four ships that I think are rumored?
Supposedly, yeah.
Now, some people don't like spoilers. For those people, I want to skip ahead a minute or two. But I am interested, Farrister, in what of these potential ships is the one that you're most excited for?
I think the one that I'm most excited for is the one that I don't think is a spoiler because it was in the trailer,
Ah, oh, well.
and that's the big dog Perseus.
Okay. Yeah, that's the only one that's not a spoiler. It's the obvious choice. And why is that?
So I think the Perseus is going to be a real sweet spot for players. As we get into this conversation about engineering, I think this will kind of come through as a theme. But in my mind, there are kind of like three or four categories of ships in Star Citizen. There's the tiniest little single-seater fighters at one end, obviously solo. There's the kind of small multi-crew where you could fly it solo or fly it with a group. There's the medium multi-crew where you really need a small group, like a party of three or four people, like the Paladin maybe. And then
I
there's
gotta
the
stop you here. I gotta stop you here real quick. I'm sorry.
Go on.
When you do say that these ships require like a group, is that, what do you mean by, you just like, you gave the Paladin as the example? Are you trying to say require it as if the group is like being effective?
No, I would say category two are the ships that you could fly solo or you could fly with a group.
Like there's
Category
just
three
more
for me
room.
is Yeah, category three for me is ships that you really want a group for. So for me in category two, the Zeus CL is
Mhm.
probably a good example because you could fly that solo and make it work for doing cargo hauling. But if there was a friend that showed up, you could do stuff on there for the friend. So you could man the turret or do the tractor beam at the back, or now you can move pips around and do engineering and stuff, but it's not necessary. I
Right.
think for me, my view on the Paladin is as much as the pilot can control stuff, I think it really comes into its own when there's a second person. If I was a solo pilot, I'd probably fly something like a heavy fighter over a Paladin. But as soon as you've got two people, the Paladin, I think, is a great choice.
Mhm.
Um, so that's a ship that I think comes into its own with a small crew. And there'll be others that I kind of fit into that category, like the Starlancer, I feel like is probably more of that if you're going into combat. Um, so I think there's
So
that kind of like small group.
yeah, and it sounds like this is all not even assuming engineering yet, right? You're just talking about from a pure combat perspective with the Paladin.
Yeah, and we'll get into that. I think for those kind of ships, engineering is going to be more of a flex. I think. Whereas when you get into like the high end, like capital ships, they're really designed for large groups. Like to my mind, to do an Idris properly, you probably need 10 people just to do the ship, maybe more. And then if you're carrying fighter wing on board, then that's going to be an extra 3, 4, 5, 6 people, depending on how much you want to push your luck. So
Yeah.
for me, those are all like distinct blended groups that kind of gradate from that lowest to the highest. And for me, the Perseus answers the criticism that I think a lot of people have about that high end, which is sometimes it can be difficult to get large groups together. And by the way, sometimes it can be. That's for me part of the appeal of those larger ships. But for me, the Perseus is probably going to be in that if you've got 3, 4, 5 people, you could have a really good time with a Perseus. And I think that's quite exciting. It's at a size point that I think is interesting because it's going to be a real threat to any kind of medium ships out there. Like if you were in a Constellation or a Corsair and you see a Perseus, you should be very worried. But I think it has enough to it that a good crew could also punch up and create some quite interesting scenarios. So I think the Perseus for me is going to be an interesting one, and it's almost, I think, going to be what some people were expecting the Polaris to be. I think it'll be much more effective for some of those medium engagements than perhaps the Polaris currently is.
Yeah. The Polaris is, even without all this stuff we're going to have to do at some point. The Polaris is a lot of work to move around and use.
It is, and I think I feel for the Polaris because as a platform, it's a very good platform. It's got all the stuff you would want, right? You've got your hangar bay at the top, which can fit a fair amount of stuff in. You've got a decent cargo bay with ramps below. You've got medical facilities on board. There's stuff for people to do, but as soon as you get into the detail, like the pilot just flies the ship. That's a criticism of the Polaris versus the Idris, where potentially the pilot also fires a thing. One of those needs to be changed, I think. I don't have a strong opinion which one, but it doesn't make sense to me that you've got a disparity there. There's the torpedo station down below, which is great situationally, but for so many engagements, I think people were expecting the Polaris to be you fire the torpedoes and that's your win button. Whereas I think there's a realization now that torpedoes work best on crippled ships to finish them off rather than as a kind of win button, or alternatively as a first strike weapon for a situation where you can win by surprise. And then you've got the chin turret, which I think is always going to be useful. But then you've got like these weird turrets that stick out the sides that have kind of limited angles and aren't that useful. So for me, the Polaris is it's in a difficult place. The Perseus, I think, is going to be much more pointed. I think that's going to be most of the things are going to be focused on firing forward. Everybody's going to be able to get involved a bit more. It's going to be potentially a smaller, tighter crew, and it's going to be more clear what that role is. I think a lot of people picked up a Polaris expecting to be fighting literally anything and winning, and I don't think that's what the Polaris is for. Whereas I think the Perseus is much more measured. Like you've got your targets, which are the medium-sized ships, which it will excel at, but it can also potentially punch up in some situations with a good crew. So I think that's why the Perseus for me is exciting.
It's certainly more feasible. It seems like it's going to be a very good ship for a certain type of content that doesn't really exist in Star Citizen yet. But it's very obvious that it's there. You know, the whole. I guess it is kind of exists. Maybe the orange level patrol missions, but I feel like there's a type of patrol that sends you out to go find other ships that are around the same size as this instead of what they normally do with the patrol missions in the game, which is just ramp up the number of enemies mostly, and then sometimes they introduce larger ships. But it feels like this is the kind of ship where you could go out with 6 friends and sort of take large bounties almost for a few hours at a time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is going to be a sweet spot. I think the Polaris has a little bit of confusion attached to what it does. Some people are very happy with it. I think some people are a bit disappointed with how it performs based on their expectations. As long as people aren't buying a Perseus thinking they're going to be soloing an Idris with it all the time, every time, I think it is going to punch hard. And to be fair, I think the Perseus will be the bane for the solo capital ship pilots when engineering comes in. A properly crewed Perseus, I think against a cap ship that's not properly crewed is going to be a potent opponent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what a lot of the consensus around even just this early vibe we're getting from engineering is like it doesn't really seem, and we'll get a lot deeper into this obviously, but just as a preview, it doesn't really seem too much like people have to pay that much attention to it and they can get by without really fiddling with engineering too much. But if you are somebody who does, you're definitely going to be able to get ahead.
Exactly. We'll get into that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, wrapping things up around IAE, what is something you would suggest new players should get into? I know maybe there's not a lot of people who are brand new to Star Citizen that are watching a podcast about it, but maybe like people who have joined over the last year who have never gotten to go to IAE. Is there anything special they should be doing for this one, or do you think they should completely stay clear and only go to Nyx?
um, well, I think IE feels like it's badged up differently this year. This may completely flop and fail, but it feels like there's a lot of confidence with potentially launching Nyx at the same time,
Yeah,
that the servers are going to be very stable. Um, I've been around for a little bit of time. I don't know that I have that same level of confidence, but there certainly seems to be a confidence in launching Nyx, i.e., Free Fly, all at the same time.
yeah,
If the servers work well, I would encourage everybody to test new ships. The best thing about IE is you get the chance to do a rental on any of the ships that are featured, and you can fly them for about 48 hours and decide what you like and what you don't like. And that's not about spending money out of game. That can even be, actually, let's try out this fighter or this fighter, and then I know what I'm going to spend my next Alpha UEC on. Because at the moment, I think all too often you actually have to buy the ship with your Alpha UEC, and then you might discover, actually, I don't really like that very much. So for me, I would encourage everybody to test fly ships, stuff that you're interested in, stuff that you've not flown for a while. Even if it's not anything about spending any real cash, it might help you just to get a feel for what you'd like to do next.
that's a good call. It is kind of crazy if you think about it. Um, Most people who hear about this game think it's very expensive to play. And so it's even more important then that we show those people that you can indeed play for free and access just about every ship. And I'm not really one to go out and buy ships in this game very much, but I will say this is the best time to do it. Because, like you said, you try it out as much as you want beforehand. All right, man. Engineering.
Engineering.
The new Grim Reaper, the new it's shaping up to kind of be a bit of a master modes character. I hope if for anybody who gets that reference, you were here for the summer of 2024. Um what do you think so far? Why do you well actually let's start with this. Why do you think CIG is putting engineering into Star Citizen?
I think engineering adds a lot of depth, especially for the larger ships. The larger your ship, I think the more that engineering adds. It fleshes out gameplay. It gives options to players, and options means people can do a lot more interesting things. And it also introduces more support roles. So you look at other successful MMO type games, and a lot of them have support roles. It's not just all about dealing or taking damage all the time. Sometimes it's about healing. Engineering is kind of a bit like a healer, or buffing. Engineering is a lot like a character that would buff. So for me, it caters to those archetypes, but at the same time, it adds so much more depth for people to be able to make choices about how they want to fly, play, fight, fix, whatever it might be.
You know, that's a really good point. The parallelism between this whole dynamic and in any normal game with parties, there are generally the person in the party that is focused on keeping everybody alive. And in this instance, we do have like healing ships, so for to say, they're repair ships, I guess. But if you do end up having that kind of a party member, you do have to ask the question, what is it they're repairing? And how does that get damaged? Because you can't not want there to be any sort of repairable stuff. That's the whole gameplay of that person, right?
Absolutely. And to be fair as well, I think CIG draws inspiration from a lot of other science fiction. And you pull up many of the sci fi greats and you see examples of this, whether it's your Scotty in engineering on the Enterprise or Han and Chewie downstairs in the Millennium Falcon with a blowtorch trying to fix things up. Like every sci-fi great. Oh, I probably shouldn't say every, because someone will point out in the comments you forgot this one that doesn't have it. But many of the sci-fi greats do have this kind of thing as part of the story. So I think it makes sense to me that CIG would want us to have this as part of our story for how we would run our ships.
Now, a lot of people are worried about the idea that they might be forced into it. Obviously, folks understand that a ship needs to be repaired and maybe even maintained at times, but people think that this is going to force them to every 10 minutes, every 20 minutes constantly have to check things and double check things and fix things and replace things. Are you getting that impression from what you've experienced so far?
Mm, maybe. um, so I would say people should not be surprised about being forced into doing things sometimes. Like anybody that has flown around and been interdicted, anybody that doesn't want a PvP engagement and has got one, will find themselves forced into situations that perhaps they would choose not to be. I think we need to be very careful of saying, sometimes that will happen. When you introduce gameplay, especially gameplay like engineering or interdiction, there are going to be impacts on other people, and it is going to make some people feel forced. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong thing to do. That said, the extent to which people want to engage this stuff, I think, will be optional to the person, but also situational to the size of the ship that they're taking. So, in those four examples I gave earlier, I think if you are in a single seater fighter, how much you want to engage with this is probably up to you. I think for a lot of them, it will be as simple as kind of doing your pips and things like that. There are going to be some very interesting single seater fighters that actually have internal spaces. So I'm thinking here about things like the Guardian, where you've got you fly from your cockpit, but then you've actually got an engineering station, you've got access to the components. I think for those players, they will have the choice of basically, if your ship is destroyed, you can choose actually whether you believe that it's destroyed or whether you think you might be able to salvage it and fix it up and either get back in the fight or get out of things. Whereas I think if you're talking about some of the larger ships, like, I don't know, an Idris or a Polaris, I think any crew that really wants to do that ship properly is going to have to engage with this stuff. And I think that's a good thing because it means that you're really kind of hammering down that crew requirement and saying this isn't a ship that you fly around solo. You should be expecting to crew and you should be ready for all scenarios, whether that means manning the turret or fixing the components or putting out fires.
Basically, as the ship gets more moving parts, you need more people.
Yeah, that's crudely what I think. And I think engineering reinforces that.
We've been kind of dancing around the topic, but ships being destroyed in Star Citizen has always been a one-shot deal. You blow up. And they introduced soft death, in which case you blow up slower. But generally, ships have always blown up. And this is the introduction of them not doing so. What it's kind of shifting the health, I would say, away from just the ship towards like the actual ship's parts that are being used as like their, I guess, damage intake, almost you could say. Why do you think the pushback against this is so strong, or there's such a negative perception of this feature when it is essentially just changing the form of the health bar for the ship?
Well, I'll come to that in a minute, just because I think something you said is poignant to me, which is I think you're right. I think this is the next iteration of soft death. So historically, it was just ship go boom. Then it was ship go boom, and it might be big boom or little boom. Now it's ship might have any number of states that may be to some extent salvageable. I think just before I dive in, that's probably really important to bear in mind, not just for the state of the game now, but for where we want the game to be when there are death of a spaceman type mechanics and more meaningful ship insurance type mechanics. There will be more reason for some people to choose to save their ship instead of just backspacing. But I also think there'll be plenty of people that will be happy to just say, it's a write off, I'll backspace or ask to be picked up or whatever. So I think that's probably an important point that you raised as well.
Right.
In terms of why are people unhappy about this, I think this is going to shake up the way that a lot of big players play the game. And when I say big players, I mean people that have spent a lot. I think in some of the things that we had to kind of think about before this conversation, one of them was what might the average player take away from this? And for me, I think it's quite a difficult question because I feel like the Star Citizen PU right now is not necessarily filled with average players. I think we are over-indexed on the people who are hard into Star Citizen.
Yeah.
And you see that when a ship like the Polaris or the Idris comes out, and you see loads of them flying around. And these are like expensive ships. So I feel like at the moment, we've got probably a higher proportion of, let's say, concierge type players, the people who have spent a lot of money on the game playing Star Citizen than I think will be the case when we get to 1.0.
Mhm.
And I think that drives a lot of behavior. So for those kind of players, engineering is going to totally disrupt how they play those type of ships. So for anyone that right now is out flying an Idris with a laser beam attached and it's just them in this massive multi-crew ship, engineering, I think, is going to shake things up for them.
Yeah.
And that understandably is going to be off-putting. And remembering how much these players might have spent, I can understand why they'd be vocal about it. Equally, I think there'll be a lot of horror stories about some of the tests that have already happened on PTU around everything catches fire all the time. It's literally unplayable. And so, again, anybody who is not perhaps wanting to engage with this stuff might hear some of those horror stories and think, I really don't want to deal with that every time I fly. So I think more testing and obviously more tuning of some of those mechanics. Personally, I think that a lot of those mechanics are turned up way too much for the purpose of testing, and I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
But again, I think as people engage with it, see it, decide how much they want to kind of engage with it, I think some of those concerns will be allayed. But I think there will be people that are very unhappy about the fact that maybe it's not going to be as possible to take out your Idris in a combat situation, take a load of fire, and have no consequences as you do
Yeah.
at the moment.
But I mean, so let's take it from a non-combat perspective then. What if somebody was taking their Idris out on their own, but they were just packing it full of boxes and shipping it across Terra?
I think that's fine. So I don't think my gut feel is I don't think engineering is going to be that important if you are doing something that has very low impact. So in my mind, I feel like if you've got a ship that is well maintained, the parts are in good working order, and you're not taking fire, you're not stressing the engines, you're not pushing the limits, I feel like you could probably fly from A to B even solo in the largest of ships. And if you're not pushing that ship to the limit and it's not taking fire, it's not taking heat, it probably isn't going to need ongoing maintenance over the course of that journey. That's my gut feel. That said, for a ship like the Idris, like suddenly it changes the role of the ship because instead of being a combat frigate, it becomes a pleasure boat, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I suspect that actually, if you wanted to do that and you weren't stressing things and you weren't under fire and you weren't pressing and you were well maintained when you set off, my gut feel is I don't think it should be lighting on fire randomly.
I hope not.
Now, if you've got a different case where you've got a caterpillar that has run 100 times and you are such a cheapskate that you refuse to do any maintenance on those components, and then on the 101st trip the quantum drive says, no mate, I need a minute, and it sets on fire. That for me feels different, because you've made a conscious choice that you're not spending any time pressing that repair button when you're in port to keep things spick and span.
Right.
Again, that feels realistic to me. If you've got a quantum drive that has done 250 jumps and you've done no maintenance on it, like, just like if you've got a vehicle in real life now, you need to occasionally blow up the air on the tires or check the engine oil if you've got an engine in there or whatever. It
Yeah,
feels right that you should do some occasional maintenance on ships. So,
exactly. We're all used to it. And you could just do it at a space station. It doesn't
yeah,
have to
exactly.
be you scrambling around in your ship. Because, like, if somebody doesn't run their ship through a bunch of combat, like you said, and the only reason that they're getting fires is because their components are getting so low in wear and tear that they're combusting on their own, it's kind of on you if you find yourself running around surprised that that happened, if you didn't just, like, check in at a space station.
Absolutely. And to be fair as well, if you are like that kind of long route hauler, that might be something you would want to do while you're in quantum travel anyway, just to help pass the time. Is I'll go and check on my components and maybe do a bit of dusting or, space repairs, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm, mhm, water the plants. It's
What are the
also
plants?
plants, dude. Um, it's also just, I don't know, it feels more liberating than anything that you can. I mean, like you said, during a quantum travel, you can, like, go through and just repair everything you need to for your off-time gameplay. Um, it definitely seems like the kind of thing that you need to get hands on to understand it's not as big a deal as what you might be worried about it to be.
I think so. And I think the more people that see it will help with that. And I also think there will be ships where you don't need to engage with it full time. And I think those will be quite good for, I think, reassuring some people. Some people, I think, will still be annoyed about it because they won't be playing the game the way they're playing the game now. It won't be something they're interested in, therefore, it'll be an inconvenience. I don't think we're going to solve that. Short of saying, well, we won't do engineering because this person doesn't like it. I think it adds depth to the game. That is probably going to switch some people off, but I think for most people who are flying, let's say within their means, they've got a properly equipped crew with the right number of crew for the size of the ship. I think it's going to be fine.
Yeah, and there are some ways in which they're making it a little easier. I would not have any doubts in my mind that we will have some sort of a blade subcomponent you can use that helps you manage these systems. The single seat fighters we know get like a one button press to fix all components, so you don't have to always repair them yourself. Um, they have different grades of components: high performance, military, industrial, and we know that industrial components are literally made to run at more stress levels without having problems. So there will be ways that even if a player doesn't want to be involved, they can also still do things to keep that gameplay away a little bit. One of the things that I'm going to do, for instance, is not be flying my own ships a lot. I'm gonna be a passenger. I don't like flying. I would prefer to be the occasional engineer if somebody needs it, but for the most part, I just I'm gonna go places and find things.
I definitely think I'll spend a lot of time as a crew member, engineer, whatever you want to call it, on other people's ships. I think that's, for me, I like that support type gameplay. So for me, that sounds great.
Yeah. And most of the time, it's just gonna be like moving power around anyways. You're not really
Yeah,
casually taking damage.
there's not that much to do all the time, but obviously depending on the ship and how complicated the ship is.
Right, right, right. So let's talk about like our true hands on. I've gotten a few hours now. I got to do it today on my stream and then a couple hours earlier in the week, which did not go well. No, it wasn't even a couple hours. It was like 20 minutes because the servers got shut down. You got to do, how long did have you gotten to try it out?
I got a couple of hours today.
So what are your first impressions?
I think my first impressions are I don't think the tuning is right for some of these things. And I think that's probably intentional so that people actually have more opportunities to test it out. I think there are some things that could be a bit slicker. Um, and I think what we have is probably a very, very basic implementation of some of the complexity I was expecting down the line. That said, I think when this hits the PU proper, I could totally see myself being an engineer on a ship like an Idris or something like that. And if we're flying out, that's the thing that I'll be spending my time doing. So I think there is enough to call it a basic implementation of engineering. Um, and I think there are going to be some teething issues, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
What ships did you try out?
Tried out the Paladin, the Zeus. I think just the Paladin and the Zeus.
So while I was playing,
Oh, and the
I
Corsair, sorry, the Corsair as well.
oh, okay. So while I was trying it out, I almost never could see the fire that might break out. And it was really hard for me to get an idea of just how much damage was being done to my ship. Were you able to actually see fires?
I saw two fires and I didn't see one.
Okay. How do you think that? I think that is probably more than, component health or anything like that. This is probably what scares people the most is fires breaking out on their ships, how overwhelming that can be, how that might happen without you noticing it, all that kind of stuff. We have our own problems right now in the EPTU, but how do you think that's coming along?
Well, I don't think it'll happen without you noticing it. I think there are sufficient warnings and everything starts flashing red. I think it's quite obvious when something is going down.
Well, even
And
if you're
if it's a
flying?
ship, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay.
Even if it's a ship where you've got that dedicated engineer terminal, like as soon as you dive into the detail, you can quickly see what's going on. I think I was having this conversation with my org as well, and um, just knowing that there's a fire doesn't automatically mean that the best thing to do is to deal with that right now. So I think this is one of those situations where you get the information and players will still have a choice which says, yes, I could deal with that fire right now, or maybe it's more important that I finish the kill on this opponent and then go and deal with the fire.
Yeah.
I think those kind of player choices for me matter. They make a difference. But I also think that there are easy ways to deal with the fire, whether it's somebody running around with a fire extinguisher or whether it's venting the atmosphere and switching off the life support or whatever. People have choices for that. I can totally imagine that many ships at the moment, when they would go into a combat situation, would be like, right, one of the things we do when we go into combat is we turn off the life support and
Yeah.
vent all the atmosphere out.
And whenever we can control gravity, you turn gravity off too.
So I think it's one of those. I think the reason why it's probably a bit of an issue at the moment is I think there are some user interface optimizations that could happen just to keep people better informed. And I think as well, because to me, I think the frequency of fires feels very, very high. My gut feel is I think it should be more occasional unless you're really taking heat.
Yeah. Like you shouldn't really see fires outside of combat. That'd be just weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you feel about the way they've handled the relays and the fuses and the power going between the components? I've seen some people be very worried that there's just going to be too many relays and like we're just going to constantly be focusing on changing out fuses all the time.
I'm actually a little bit underwhelmed by it. I was expecting more. So in the ships that I've tested so far, the first thing I did when I got aboard the ship was I went in and like a little loot goblin, I picked up all of the fuses and all of the relays to see what would
Mhm.
happen. And all the power still flowed, and I lost maybe like 1 pip of power for every relay that I took out. So if I took out 6 relays on a ship, I probably had access to most of my power to do most of my things. Um, for me, that was a little bit underwhelming. I was hoping
Yeah.
for more, and I was hoping for more control as well. So if I'm taking out relays and they're damaged, I would want to be able to choose what power gets rerouted where, so that I've got more control over that. At the moment, it feels very bland. It doesn't really matter if a fuse went. You might lose a little bit of power, but you can still manage that. So I would actually like fuses and relays to have a much bigger impact than they seem to in this test.
Okay.
I
How do
might
you
be in the minority in that opinion.
Well, they made that change just recently where they said that fuses would be the sort of throughput of power and not necessarily a breaker in the line. So like if you had more fuses, you'd have more power, and if you had less, you'd have less. Do you think that that had an effect on this change, and would you prefer it went back to the other way, or are you just strictly saying you wish there was more control over where the power went?
I think I would like more control over where the power went. For me, uh, I like the idea of somebody in an engineering position making choices about how to make that power work. And I think that could happen much more dynamically if routes were involved. At the moment, if relays are out, you lose a few pips of power, and so you just have to reduce the power to something, anything, in order to make that work. Um, for me, that feels maybe a little bit watered down, but uh, I also think that they've got a challenge in not making something that is so complicated and so overwhelming, and also so risky that somebody gets onto the bridge of your Idris and pulls out the fuse and everything stops working.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a balance to be struck. I personally would go a bit deeper into that power flow management. Especially for ships that have dispersed components. So some ships have all of the power plants together. Other ships have redundancy across the ship with components in different places. I think if you had more detailed control over routing for those dispersed ships in particular, you could do some much more interesting things. And that might also hold true if we get battery type gameplay in the future. But as a tier zero, I'm not going to lose any sleep over the fact that this is what it does, but it feels a little bit underwhelming to me at the moment.
You know, you mentioned battery, and I just realized we haven't really heard much talk about batteries, but we know that that's supposed to be a thing, right?
Well, this is where kind of I think we're very shallow on some of the resource management with this initial implementation, which by the way is fine. This in my mind is like tier zero. It's like the basics. But I would hope that in the future we will get access to batteries, which lets you store up some of your additional capacity to then use in bursts later. I think that makes power management a lot more interesting because it's not just about matching the pips of what you're producing, but potentially you can cover an overage or cover a power plant going out for a small amount of time in order to effect some repairs.
Yeah.
But it's not just batteries. I think talked about having resource management for fuel or I don't know, maybe even ballistics for some of the weapons and things like that. Um, I think there's more that could be done to give more control over all of the sort of resources you might have on the ship.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when they did the design brief for engineering. I mean, they were talking about even just a permission system launching with it so that certain people could access certain components, but we haven't really heard anything about that lately.
No, but one of the things that the engineering terminals do in many ships is you can show all of the doors, and in many cases, a lot of the component doors can be opened from the engineering station. So it might be feasible for the future.
Yeah. And I do, it's fun to close and lock doors and stuff. Yeah. It's cool to finally have some deeper functionality in the ships, even as you said, if it's feeling a little bit light, it it's nice that they have like they're more than just vehicles, I guess. They're more than just boxes floating through space. They've got power to them now, and we can decide what happens to it.
Realistically, I think what this implementation is it's very basic power and it's cooling. Like even fires are not. I don't think that
Sorry.
big of a thing if you're on top of how things are working. So, um, the engineering gameplay in a ship that's working well is kind of just like manage your power levels, make sure your cooling is okay, and go knock out a fire if one breaks out.
Yeah, the cooling can get a little bit intense. It's been fun to practice with it though. On the stream we just had, anybody who's listening, if you guys want to see this, the most recent stream on the Space Tomato Gaming channel has a thumbnail about fleet battles, but the title's about engineering. And maybe 3/4 of the way through the stream, we took a Corsair out. Corsair? Paladin. we took a paladin out and we started taking some mercenary and bounty missions just to see like how would this affect somebody if they were just going about their normal everyday gameplay with engineering on. Like what one of our supporters said in the chat here during the live podcast, for us it didn't really change much. Everything basically played out the same way. We did a bunker run, no difference. We did a bounty, almost no difference. But when people say that they're worried that this is going to kill solo gameplay or something, I think it's important to make an example of going out and doing the exact things players do, because that's the only way we're going to know. And it doesn't make any difference. But when we were testing it with a cutter, we had this cutter, it was flying around us, shooting us, and it couldn't do enough damage to take our shields down. So that gave us a really good opportunity to just kind of sit there and receive fire and see how it damaged components and started fires and all that kind of stuff. And it was a genuinely refreshing moment to interact with a system and see things happen in correspondence with it. But I feel you in that it is definitely still a basic version. I mean, we don't have gravity control, there's no permissions. I don't know how far they're going to go with it, but I like it so far. I like where it's headed.
I do, and I think I would suggest some improvements already. So I need to get the feedback form for the EPCU, but like at the moment, for me, there are kind of like two meaningful screens for the engineer. And the first is the engineer's station, where you can delve into some of the detail and see the overview of the ship. And the second is on one of the MFD screens. That diagnostics tab on the MFD is actually really quite helpful. I don't know why that isn't also on the engineer station, because that gives quite a lot of granular information and control in quite an easy to read format. So um, I think it's almost a little bit of a shame that you've kind of got those in two places, but
Yeah. The UI definitely will need some work.
it's pretty good. It's
Yeah,
pretty
how do
good
you
as
feel
well.
about
Like
like the
you've got
3D interface? That's a sticking point for a lot of people.
But the amount that you have to engage with it. So this is why I would quite like to see that diagnostic screen introduced to the engineer station as well, just to give you more choices. I think the amount you have to engage with that 3D interface kind of depends on what's going on in the ship. Um, it gives me enough of an overview to know what's happening and where. The interesting thing is going to be how that translates to some of the monsters. Because for me, if I'm in a Corsair or a Zeus or a Paladin, it's fairly easy and straightforward to use. Um, I can imagine if you're in an Idris or a Javelin or something like that, that's got multiple decks and multiple rooms and multiple components, like that's going to get very complicated very fast. So it'd be interesting to see how that translates. But for me, I quite like the 3D view. How about you?
Um, I think I'm okay with a 3D view. I'm not against it by like philosophy or whatever, by principle, but I would like there to be more sort of reactivity, interactivity, um, tactility to using it. I think good sound design really helps a user interface go a long way, and also like good reactive buttons. And it still has the same problem that I think a lot of Star Citizen interfaces have, which is like I'm not always entirely sure if I'm truly pressing the button or not. And I think that's partially
Yeah.
because they're not putting that much effort into the Star Citizen UIs. But that is certainly a place where I feel, I'm like clicking on a component and I'm like, did I select that component? When I turned it on or off, did it actually turn off? How can I tell? And I chalked that up to it being early, but it's definitely one of the things that has bugged me early on.
No, that's a fair criticism actually, because I did experience that when I was trying to do the room venting, and I was like, "Oh, I'll turn off the life support," and I was like, "Is that one off or is that one on?" It took me a couple
Yeah.
of clicks to figure out. So no, I think that's fair.
But overall, I don't have a problem with a 3D UI for this. And I think it probably helps save some time in switching between floors or decks on a ship.
And for anybody who is kind of especially for the larger ships, who is managing a crew that might need stuff doing, having that 3D view is probably going to be quite valuable, because you can say, we've got a fire on the starboard rear, and you can quickly and visually seeing that, rather than having to worry about figuring out where each component is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also, I think I would love to see the shields on the engineering screen. Because as an engineer, you're probably focused mostly on the power until you know that your ship is started to, like in the middle of a battle, you're probably mostly focused on shifting power around as needed until you know that components are starting to take damage. It's nice to flick back and forth to that screen and be able to see where your shields are at, if they're about to go down and you need to be staying on that screen or not. But I realized when I wanted to be monitoring the ship, I was wondering what's our shield status at, and you can't see that on the engineering display.
It's a good point. Yeah, I think it's a it's a great point.
I'd also love to see. I'm sorry, I've got a list. I've also loved to see. Um, you know how on the star map right now, the local map, it shows you where your party members are or where your people are on the ship.
Yes.
That would be very helpful in the engineering display too. Somebody might be asking you like, "Where is the component you need me to fix?" And you're like, "You're standing right next to it." Would be very useful.
And not least for opening doors for people as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, so
We need to
these
make
are
sure we submit this list of suggestions. It has to go
yes.
in as feedback for the test.
Yeah, I'm just gonna make an issue council report and link this podcast in it, and then expect them to listen to the whole thing to get this little bit. But it is. I think it's a satisfying experience so far for me. What
I think so too. I think it's promising. I want a lot more, but I think this is a very good start, and I've been missing this for about 12 years, I think.
And that is a perfect segue into my next question, because 12 years is a long time, and after that long time, you still want more. What do you think took so long to make it to this point with engineering?
Well, I think number one, it probably wasn't the priority. And if I'm honest, I probably wouldn't have had it as the priority either. It
Mm,
is support gameplay rather than gameplay that like stands on its own feet. You're only ever going to be doing this as part of something else, either a ship with a crew or a ship that you run that you've flown somewhere or fought in or whatever. Um, so for me, it's understandable that it was lower down on the priority list. I also think that there's a lot that needs to be technically done to make this stuff. Even just sat at that console and using it to open and close doors across the ship, like you need technically everything to be properly linked in. And there's been so much work done on that kind of thing over the years that um, I think that kind of makes sense to me that it'll be slow. I think the other thing, and it'll be interesting to get into this, the test that we've got specifically names certain ships as being rigged up for testing with engineering,
right.
um, which suggests to me that the other ships are not rigged up for engineering, which suggests to me that there is still a lot of work for a lot of ships to actually get it working with engineering. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. It might just be that in order to focus the test, they've just narrowed down to a small list of ships and said, these are the ones that you're testing. But I think when we spoke before about why do we think that engineering is so delayed, my gut feel is I think that every single ship needs to be gone through to make sure that it's properly up and running with these mechanics. And I suspect that is a lot of work because it probably needs to be done individually, ship by ship, and we have a lot of ships in this game.
Yeah, so when they do an update like that on the ship for engineering, do you think that would bring they're going to take the time to bring every ship up to the current standard, or for example, do you think the Constellation's going to get an engineering update but the interior is going to be the exact same?
I think it will probably depend on what needs doing for every single ship. If we are going to get engineering, I don't even want to say this year or early part of next year. I think you're not going to be able to redo every single ship to the current standard,
Oh
even
God,
just
no.
for some of the art assets that you need to do. So
Yeah.
I would say logically, if there is a desire to get engineering properly in the PU, at some point in the next 6 months, it's probably just going to have to be a simple engineering pass on every single ship. Um, I also wonder whether, and I this could have lots of pros and cons, but I also wonder whether it's possible to have like ships that are rigged for engineering that have it, and ships that are due to have it arrive, but still have everything still on the same build. I don't know how feasible or not that would be. I think that would cause a lot of challenges, but might be a solution to get engineering out to some people for some ships sooner. Um, but no, I think redoing everything would be too much work. So my gut feel is I think it would probably just be an engineering pass.
I find myself wondering if they're even going to do that. If engineering is going to come out with all the ships. Remember when they were saying that it was going to be like somewhere around 10 to 15 ships that would be ready for the engineering release in 4.0?
I mean, it's possible, but can you imagine a weird scenario where, like, the Polaris has engineering and all of the pitfalls and challenges that you have to overcome to make it work, and then the Idris doesn't? It just, I think it would create a lot of problems.
Honestly, yeah, I can't imagine that in Star Citizen.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
I'm sorry, but yeah, I could see that happening. I don't think it should, but they were originally going to release it like that. I think their mindset about what they will and will not release has changed since then. Maybe they'll wait, but if I don't even think it's anywhere near half the ships are in that list of the ones
No.
ready for engineering. Um,
And
and they've been
I
working
think
on that all year.
if I'm honest, I would rather have engineering in the game in some of the ships and not in others than no engineering at all. But I would much rather have engineering in the game on all of the ships than some of the ships.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be incredibly jarring to go into a ship and wonder if you need to pay attention to your power or not.
And one of the things that's been raised in chat, which is quite interesting, is Vulcan might have something to do with it. And I noticed this in the client. My client for the test universe had Vulcan enabled by default.
Yeah,
And that's unusual because I usually run on DX. So it might be that Vulcan is the thing that makes that happen. And again, there may or may not be an impact of, if that is the case, does forcing everybody onto Vulcan create other challenges?
I would like to see what happens if you try to launch this EPTU the with DX11 enabled. Because one of the theories has been that engineering has been delayed because the things that respond to it, like fire, can't be rendered on DX11. They just didn't build it for that. So I do wonder. I mean, it's funny because we can't really see it that much on Vulcan right now, but I do wonder if that is part of the case, and if switching back to DX11 does anything to hurt the way the PTU is running, or the EPTU.
An interesting test case.
Yeah, that it is. Um, all right. So a lot of people view this as a dedicated role, the engineer, that you would basically need to either find someone and hire them to be an engineer for your ship, right? That there's a group of people who are just waiting to be always become engineers, or that you yourself would either have to choose between being an engineer or a pilot or a gunner or something like that. Do you think that the way that this is shaping out, people will be able to just pile into a ship together? And then if somebody finds themselves near a component, or if somebody's on a turret and they have a chance to get off, like they could just take over the job temporarily? Or is this like you're always going to need to have an extra person for it kind of thing, in your opinion?
I think that the answer to that question probably depends on the size of the ship, and the makeup of the ship to some degree as well. So if I think about the hull A, for example, right? If you are somebody in a hull A, you're probably just a solo pilot. Your job is to fly the ship. Your job is also to load and unload the cargo. And I think with engineering, your job will also be to occasionally do a little bit of engineering stuff. I think if you are in a large ship like an Idris or a Polaris, you probably want somebody dedicated keeping an eye on all of this stuff. So I think those ships would have a dedicated engineer role. Um, I think the smart crews in those ships will not have dedicated firefighters. I think you will use your crew wisely. So if you've got a fire right next to a turret, you'd say, "John, mate, just pop out and put out that fire." Um, so I think even on the larger ships at the moment, my gut feel is there'd probably be only one engineer that's kind of overseeing everything and then just marshalling the crew where it's needed. I think there'll be an interesting subset of ships where this will be one of the things that another person could do. So I'm thinking here ships like if you had a couple of people on a Zeus or something like that, potentially they could be in the co-pilot seat some of the time, making ATC requests or doing whatever, maybe moving cargo on the tractor beam, and then also doing engineering some
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. It's like your two-person crew.
Yeah. But I think it would depend. Like it's going to depend on the situation as well. So I think for a paladin, an engineer would be a useful role for a third person. But I also think that a two-person paladin is still going to be fairly viable, and it might just be that the turret gunner from time to time has to do a little bit of engineering stuff.
Mhm.
So I think it will be flexible based on the makeup of the group, the situation at hand, and the ship in question.
So players in general can look at this application of gameplay through their own lens and kind of try and decide what things they can do to lean into it or avoid it a little bit more.
I think so, and some of that is going to be driven by how survivable you want your ship to be. I think it's the same piece around medical gameplay. Like, to what extent do you want to hold out for a medic, or to what extent do you just want to be like, no, I want to shoot things and I'm just going to do whatever I need to do to be able to get shooting again the quickest? I think that's going to be an individual choice. And it's certainly until we get more meaningful consequences down the line. I think that's probably going to be true to some extent for engineering. Um, but I also think for some of the larger ships, it introduces much more interesting support type gameplay rather than just, oh, you're the pilot or you're the turret gunner.
Right. And what would you say is the largest ship you would feel comfortable in flying solo, let's say, if you were just like doing whatever it is you normally do in Star Citizen? How large of a ship would you be comfortable flying solo in a high security system like Terra or Castra?
Well, this is where the questions that you ask matter, because I've taken this literally, and I think the largest ship I'd be comfortable flying solo pretty much anywhere is probably going to be the Hull E, because it's massive and there's not going to be that much to do other than for a pilot. And if you're under attack, you probably ain't going to end well anyway. So I think in the spirit of the question, I think probably it depends on what you're trying to do. But as we discussed earlier, in my mind, you could fly an Idris around as a solo pilot somewhere safe. And as long as you've been having your components in good order, I don't think you would need to engage with this. But that said, if you are going into any kind of combat situation, you should be thinking about turret gunners and you should be thinking about somebody to do the engineering. So um, I think it'll be difficult to know until we see what the true vision is. But my gut feel is things aren't going to set on fire randomly all the time. It might happen occasionally, just like being interdicted happens occasionally. But it's not something that you necessarily have to prepare for in every situation on every ship. But you may just need to flex what one or two people are doing in order to manage that situation if it comes up.
Yeah. So this kind of, in any way that it does kill solo gameplay, it is for the people who are doing dedicated combat in large ships.
Yeah, I think this will kill solo gameplay for people who probably shouldn't be doing what they're doing at the moment solo.
And I have another. Okay, so the other thing that people will claim is not necessarily that it kills solo gameplay, but that it kills the whole game. So I ask you this: let's say that the naysayers of engineering are correct, and that nobody ends up liking it, and everybody flees the game and nobody plays anymore and CIG crashes and burns just because they made ship maintenance a thing. Do you think that they will reverse course? Do you think that they would turn the clock back on engineering and consider going in a different direction?
I hope not. I mean, it's possible, but I hope not. I think CIG has a vision, and engineering definitely adds complexity, especially for larger ships. And for some people, that's going to be a bad thing. But I think for the game, it's a good thing. I think the key thing will be getting the balance right so that if you are in your single seater fighter, you don't really notice it that much unless you're really paying attention to it. But if you are in the largest of ships, you really need to be all over it. As long as they can get that balance right, I feel like we won't end up in a situation where everybody is up in arms about it. And it's funny, you were talking about master modes earlier and how people hated master modes, and um, CIG have rode it all back. And I was just thinking, have they? Have they really? Because like
I
when I
mean,
fly at the moment, I still have master modes,
yeah,
and nobody's
they,
really complaining about it anymore.
but that's the funny thing. We were talking about this on stream earlier. That the funny thing is like it's gotten to the point where most people have gotten used to it and adapted to it. But it was basically a year ago next week, a year ago, 2 weeks from now, that they announced that master modes is essentially getting removed in favor of their operator modes. And it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of like the speed of
Yeah,
development almost can't even keep up with the speed of controversy.
yeah. But like even that to me feels like you've got a little sign on your ship that says master mode, and you put a little sticker on top of it that says operator mode instead. And you're like, look, it's different. Everyone, look, it's
Yeah.
different. It's got a different label on it.
But the thing with that is like they've already had operator modes. So it is really interesting that they didn't start with doing operator modes like this, because they introduced operator modes way back when they added missile operator.
Well, we have operator modes now within the master modes.
Yeah, but I'm saying like before they ever had master modes, we still had operator modes, right? You switch between scanning and missile mode and SCM mode. It's weird that they didn't try to do a navigation operator mode first. I didn't really think of that at the time, but
Well,
I
I
do.
don't remember that because I don't remember if that's I don't remember if that came in with master modes.
No, it
So
was
it
before.
used to be it used to be that you would fire missiles from your SCM mode.
Yeah. But at some point, so you
That
could fire guns
yeah.
and missiles, right? And then at some point, they made it so that you had to press a button to switch to missile mode. You remember that?
I've oh, well, I know that that's what we have now. I'm saying I don't remember
Oh,
whether
maybe that
that
was
was like
before you started. Oh, you started a while.
no, no. I started a long time ago. I guess what I'm saying is I don't know if it was um, everything, then missiles, then mode, master modes, or if it was everything all at once. It doesn't really matter. I don't think.
It's just yeah. It's semantics. It is interesting to me though that um they didn't do that, but that's a whole other podcast, folks, right?
It is.
uh,
I hope they stick to their guns on this. I can see how this will add depth to the game, and for anybody who is hoping to play Star Citizen for a long time in the long term, for anybody that's hoping this will be their game, depth is going to be a very good thing. You don't want a shallow experience that you're going to get bored with quickly. Engineering provides something else to master, something else to consider, some other way for people to work together to run their ships. So I really hope that they stay the course about it. I think there will be controversy. We've already heard a lot. I'm hoping some of that's just because the test for this is tuned all the way to 100. And I think there's some balancing opportunities. I think there will be a lot of flack from some people who've spent a lot of money because this is going to start to force them to change their behavior. But I really hope that CIG stick the course and that we get even more depth in engineering so that it becomes even more interesting.
it is definitely, this is why I suggest people not spend a lot of money early on. There are a lot of things in Star Citizen that you just might not know are going to happen. This this is one of them. Now, I think this is a one that's easy to roadmap because it's been in a design document for 12 years now. But these are the kinds of things that like people gotta know, and I have no idea how to let people know because there's so many people who are. Some people think that this has just been thrown together. Like this wasn't part of the plan. It was just kind of added last minute. And there's definitely something to be said about the amount of folks who have been drawn into Star Citizen based off of CIG's marketing for, these really cool cinematic trailers with awesome spaceship flying and gameplay. But a lot of things are missing from the game when those people go and see the trailer and then try the game. And then 6 months later, suddenly the game's changing. And I do not know how they can get past that. But it's going to be part of the pushback that comes from engineering. It'll be part of the pushback that comes from control surfaces, from security, reputation. I think we saw it with like the cargo refactor with physically moving boxes. Like it keeps happening, right?
And it's going to keep happening. I think there are going to be. I think there are going to be more painful pain points on the journey. I think Death of a Spaceman in whatever format that ends up taking is probably going to be the most disruptive. As is a series of wipes that will need to happen. So I think they are going to have pain points, but um, I think that's the nature of us playing a game that is still heavily under development, I suppose.
Yeah, it really is. Speaking of which, anything else going on coming up in Star Citizen world that you are excited about?
This is the big thing. I am more excited for engineering than anything else. It might surprise you to know I haven't been on the PTU yet to Nix because this was my priority was the engineering
Oh
stuff.
man,
So this is the biggest thing for me. I'm definitely excited for Nix coming along. I think it's going to add something. I don't think it's going to be as transformative as other people are expecting, but it's going to add again more depth to what we've got, um, and I'm hoping to see some more progress on ships. But um, I think this is the big thing for me. If we can get engineering into the PU in the next 6 months, I'll be very very happy.
I would love it in the PU in the next 6 months. That'd be crazy. I am hoping that from what we're seeing, it's looking like summer time ish or so. But if engineering is the most exciting thing for you, then I think we should discuss an angle of it that does not get discussed very often, and that is what happens with it outside of ships. What, in your mind, do you think could be done to make this a system that could be applied throughout the game world and just add to gameplay and other locations besides the ships we're flying around?
I mean, I don't really want to answer because it really sounds like you've given this a lot of thought and you must have a great answer ready.
Oh no, no, no. I mean, I just please.
I've largely considered this in the context of ships. I think there are some as we get deeper into other gameplay, there are some interesting interplays between ships. So like I really like the idea that um if you've got a power plant or fuel stores or something like that, you could hook up to another ship. So this is me romanticizing and speculating about the future, but I love
We
the
love it.
idea of flying around as like almost like a rescue vehicle. So you're in your SRV and you can hook up to another ship that is so broken it's got no power, and you can give them access to your power, and you can move some fuel across. And not least for ships like if you're flying through the hangar bay of the Idris and you land on the Idris, and then you can transfer some fuel and top up the fighters, and then they can go out and fight again. You've got somebody on a tractor beam moving missiles back onto it and stuff like that. For me, that's like the exciting next step of engineering. But I feel like you're maybe coming at an angle from like some of the larger locations and space stations and bases and all that.
You ever heard about the fuel siphoning?
Well, in game,
Yeah.
no.
That was one of the forms of salvage they wanted to have. scraping, I guess what they called munching, um, component retrieval, and like siphoning, fuel, oxygen kind of stuff. So you might get that.
Well, one of the things that makes me hopeful is if you look at most of the recently done ships, they almost all have a fuel port.
Yep,
Um,
top and
Now,
bottom.
some of that might be rigging for squadron, um, but I also hope that some of that might make its way to the verse. Like that would be so good for me if, again, I'm kind of into the support gameplay. So the idea for me of sitting on the flight deck of an Idris and Gladius flies in, and I'm there with my little fuel pod and like plugging it in, and then they're getting their fuel, and then I'm like, right, off you go away. I love that idea. So it's again, it's probably not a gameplay priority, but I like the idea of doing those kind of things for engineering, like flying in and jump starting your friend's ship because everything's dead, and then you've got some power into their battery so they can make repairs and stuff. Like
Yeah.
things that give players choices, that let us do things, that let us build things and make things work. I'm awful.
I wonder if they're going to make refueling all drone based. Just popped into my head that it is very possible that they make everything that has to do with refuel, rearm, and repair drone based for ease of use, and have players control those drones. And they just change like the Starfarer into a ship that has drones on it instead of just a giant fuel boom.
I think what you mean is, will they make refuel, rearm, repair drone based again? Because it used to be.
Yeah, yeah. Technically, the space station spawned those little tiny drones. Is that what you're talking about? The Cryastro ones?
It did.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to give you a little throwback. Um, all right. I know you said that engineering is the most exciting thing for you, but I am going to have to ask you to scrape the brain a little bit. Now, last time you were on the show, we did some predictions, and it hasn't been too long, so I'm not going to ask you for new predictions yet, but I'm going to remind you. You said that in quote 3, 6, and 12 months, folks will be disappointed. We're still waiting on that one. We're
Yeah.
only I think 2 months in from there. But you also said that the Perseus and the Hull B would be launching soon. But the Perseus is coming out this week, so good call. Um, and I did say I'm not going to have you update these predictions, but I do want to hear a little bit of speculation, okay? Because it's getting closer to the end of the year. Things are going to shift around for CIG as they look at how they did and figure out the next year. We know that they've been working on certain features and locations and stuff. What's your like wild card kind of thing that you think we might see in the first quarter of next year?
Well, so we've talked about the Perseus. I'm feeling confident there. We talked about the whole B. I think we might see the whole B as soon as maybe Q1 next year, maybe Q2 next year.
Okay.
Um, I gave you a secret prediction which I didn't broadcast, but it wasn't for Q1, so I'm going to keep that to myself again, and then next time I'm on, we can maybe share that one.
All right.
Um, I can tell you what I'd like to see.
I
This
love
isn't
that. Yeah.
this isn't a prediction because I don't know whether this is even on the cards. But what I would like to see, and I've talked about this before, is a couple of salvage ships that are missing, and that the first would be a salvage equivalent to the Golem, something that is in that starter category, highly accessible. We might just see something around that. But I also think something that is like a salvage version of the mole. So we've got the Fortune, the Vulture, which are kind of, and then you've got the Reclaimer, which is kind of like whoa, and there's nothing in the middle. I'd love to see something from a salvage perspective that had like a 2 or 3 person crew that was mid-sized. So I do a lot of salvage in the verse. When I saw that Glacium ring, everyone was talking about mining, and I was like, oh no, I'll do some salvage in there, please, thank you. So I
I
would love
found
to
good
see kind
salvage.
of those.
Lots of
Exactly,
panels
I'd
out there.
love to
Yeah.
see those gaps filled. I don't know whether that's on the cards, but that would be on my wish list.
I think a starting salvaging ship would be good, as mentioned in the chat. I think it would be really our salvation, if if you will. Um, but a medium-sized salvage ship. A lot of people say that they should just like fortunize the mole and make a salvaging version of the mole. Would you rather see that or like a new mid-sized salvage ship?
Um, I would personally rather see a new one, but fortunizing the mole seems to me it would make absolute perfect sense because Argo would be like, hey, we've got the raft, we've got the SRV, we've got the mole. They're all kind of the same sort of size. We're missing a salvage thing. Let's just take the mole and whack some salvage arms on it. I think for me, my biggest criticism of the mole is that um, I feel like the interplay between pilot and miners isn't always the best. I'm answering carefully here because I would really want to talk to somebody like Red Monster about this to get his views. But um, I would rather see something that was kind of like 2 to 3 players, but the pilot was more actively involved in the actual salvaging as well, rather than segregated off. But I could totally see like in law, Argo would just be like, "Yeah, we'll do that. We'll just stick some salvage arms on a mole. Done."
Well, now that you say the other ships, the SRV, the raft, the mole, it feels like it would be wrong to not do another mid-sized salvage ship to fill out the family.
I know, right?
Make it happen, Argo. All right, man. I think that about wraps up our talk. We got a good amount of engineering discussion done, but there's going to be a lot more we learn over the next weeks and months. So I'm looking forward to our next show when we get to do probably a couple more tests at least and hear hopefully some more information. You know, IAE offers a pretty strong chance for us to get at least 1 or 2 interesting video updates, and I do think that engineering there's a good chance they'll have something to say about engineering there. So maybe we'll even get some more information soon.
I hope so. I think we spoke before CitizenCon, and I think I said I really wanted an engineering update at CitizenCon. It was called out that some of the things that we didn't get an update on were in train. We're now seeing that for engineering with this going to the test universe. So I think it'd be good to have more of an update. But to be fair, I think the fact that we've got this in player hands in some form is very, very promising.
Finally.
I think there's more to do to test and play around with it, but the future's looking good. Future's looking bright. So that might just be the fire in the power plant.
Maybe, maybe throw the power plant out the ship if you see all that. All right, dude. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this. It's been another lovely talk about space nerd stuff. Can you let the folks know where they can find more of your space nerd stuff before you go?
My space nerd stuff is on YouTube, youtube.com/Farrister. And I have plenty of space nerd stuff on there, usually a couple of times a week.
Yeah, I do watch a lot of that space nerd stuff. Go check it out, folks. He's like the Attenborough of Star Citizen, making some great documentary quality videos about locations, ships, and some features. Thank you again, Farrister, for joining me for this talk. And thank you, everybody, for listening in or watching. Remember, keep in mind, if you don't like the YouTube stuff, you can head over to the audio platforms wherever you listen to podcasts. We are there. We upload the video to there, which is kind of weird, but it's a thing. And if you're on those platforms, specifically Spotify, consider dropping a review. Let us know. How's it going? Check out the comments below. Answer our weekly question. Let me know how you guys are doing. Thank you again so much for listening or watching. I'll see you all next week.